You're listening to The Other 50%, a herstory of Hollywood. I'm Julie Harris Walker. This is the podcast where I talk to successful women in entertainment and hear their stories. Our presenting sponsor is the end-to-end production solution, Green Slate. Whether it's start paperwork, time cards, purchase orders, or reports, everything is digital, everything is on the app, and you can work from wherever you are. The future is actually here. And if you'd like to hear this pitch in person or see it for yourself, call me as I am working there. Here's my number, 310-783-2001, extension 323, or julie.walker@gslate.com. Now, back to my weekend job. For today's episode, I spoke with one of my very favorite authors, Lorna Landvik. Lorna is the author of 12 novels, including the best-selling Patty Jane's House of Curl, Oh My Stars, Best to Laugh, Once in a Blue Moon Lodge, and my very favorite, Angry Housewives Eating Bon Bons. She has also performed as a stand-up comedian and actor, and annually does her one-woman show, Party in the Rec Room, in Minneapolis. She serves margaritas to the audience while doing improv for the whole show. She is a riot, and this was fun. You can find us at theother50%.com for added features, photos, show notes, and the merchandise. You can also listen on Apple Podcasts and all the podcast places. And also the full season of Catch a Break, The Insider's Guide to Getting Into and Navigating Hollywood, is now available on Apple Podcasts and all the podcast places, and on the website, catchabreakpodcast.com. Go check that one out too, because we are actively working on season 2. All right, here's my conversation with Lorna Landvik. Have a listen. Normally, I just start by saying, what do you do? But since you are one of my very favorite authors, we're going to skip that part because you are a prolific author who's written, gosh, how many books?
An even dozen so far.
Oh, perfect. And I got to say, they're all delicious. And the way you write is so cinematic. Like, I can see all of them being television shows, just so Hollywood should know that. And you used to live in LA, but now you live in Minneapolis?
That is true.
Walk us through kind of the early days of your career. And how did you know you were going to be a writer?
Oh, boy. That came very easy to me. When I learned how to read in the first grade, I was smitten, transported. I thought, this is what I want to do. I want to write words like see Spot jump and see Dick run. And so really my course was set, but I had always also liked to perform. So I decided in my 20s to get into stand-up comedy and improvisational comedy. My best friend and I had a duo for a while, Lori and Lorna, and we were wildly successful in very, very small audiences. And we had so much fun. And then we decided to move to LA. She ultimately left, but I stayed there with my fella, and we lived in the most fantastic old school Hollywood Boulevard apartment complex called Peyton Hall. And I would write a lot of short fiction. I would write comedy monologues for myself and my friends, but I never thought that I had the gravitas in my 20s, not that I have any now, but to write a novel. And so I just really had so much fun living in LA, auditioning. I was at the Comedy Store and the Improv, and I loved it, but I didn't have that which it really takes, I think, to succeed in Hollywood, which is the perseverance, because I think perseverance leads to luck. And I didn't have the boldness as on the business side. I did in my performance, but to sell myself was just, awful. I was,
it's brutal.
It is. And I, was raised, Lutheran in a Norwegian family, and my paternal grandmother's words are embedded in my brain even still. And they were, don't toot your own horn. Don't toot it, Lorna. Don't you toot it. Like, Grandma, what's a horn for? But
you were Minnesota nice.
Yes, too nice. I think it could be redubbed as Minnesota acquiescent. So we had our first daughter in 1985. And shortly after her birth, I dreamt that I was Gorbachev's temp secretary. And nobody had known what the relationship between Gorbachev and Reagan was. And in my dream, a nuclear weapon had been sent to Russia. And I, as a temp, I didn't know how to school Gorby to not retaliate. And I just woke up and I was so afraid. And I stood over my little baby's crib thinking, what kind of world have we brought you into? And that dream literally was the first step in millions, I would say, because we joined a peace march called the Great Peace March for Global Nuclear Disarmament. And we left Griffith Park with 1,000 other marchers. And in beautiful Barstow, California, all the funding fell through. And the founding committee, they left. But the only thing that was taken were the shower trucks. So we still had our movable city of a daycare bus, school bus, post office truck, equipment trucks, food trucks. And even though half the marchers left, 500 of us remained, and we finished the march. We walked from LA to Washington, D.C. It took us 9 months. We saw the spectacular geography and beauty of this country. We met fabulous people, and we also dealt with, people driving by, giving us the finger and yelling at us, "Get a job!" But it was fantastic.
You do this with an infant?
Well, she was 14 months at the time, and when we finished, she was 23 months. I think that's 9 and 14. Yeah, she was 23 months, and she was the second youngest marcher. There was a marcher who was probably 2 months younger, but they were on the daycare bus every day, and the daycare bus would shuttle them to either playgrounds or child-friendly sites, museums, and then as a marcher, you had to work 2 days instead of walking. So my husband and I always worked on the daycare bus. And she loved it. In fact, she would wake up in the middle of the night crying to go outside. She'd side. So when we came back to Los Angeles after that march, my dreams had shifted a little, and I had really wanted to do comedy, and that is my preferred form of performance. But I also love a good dramatic role, and I was hoping that this would launch my big movie career, and
Sure.
It failed to. Why not? You're in Hollywood, and it failed to do that. And I thought, I don't think I want that anymore, because when I lived there, I was only being sent out on really stupid young ingenue or girlfriend roles, and I've always liked the big meaty character part. So we moved back to Minneapolis, and just as we were loading up our old Chevy, the two characters of my first novel, Patty Jane's House of Curl, came into my head with the title. They were so polite, and I had no idea who the two women were, but I started writing. In Minneapolis, I auditioned for Dudley Riggs, which is an improvisational group, and I got into that. So I would perform at night and write on my nights off, and or at the library in the daytime, with my daughter toddling around in the kids section. And I wrote the book all by hand, and this was before internet. So I found out everything I had to do via a book called The Writer's Market, and it's still published annually. And that gave you listings of agents and how to format a manuscript. So I did everything that book told me to, and I papered Manhattan with query letters to agents, and I just got all sorts of no, thank you, nope, sorry, and until I finally got that one yes. And that's how I differ as a writer than a performer, because I refused to give up with the writing. I thought, I'm not going to let somebody's no be my final answer. So it took me a long time to get an agent, and nearly 30 rejections before a very small publishing house called Bridgeworks said they wanted to publish Patty Jane. And they were a very small independent publisher, but it was a mom and pop publisher, and the pop had been the former publisher of the Wall Street Journal. So he had a lot of, nationwide connections. Yeah. So I got reviewed far more extensively than I would have had it been a much, a press without the former publisher of the Wall Street Journal at its helm. So then publishers who had said no were then bidding against each other for the paperback rights. So it really showed me again the serendipity of everything.
So that first book was really successful.
It did do really well, yeah. And it's still in print, and it's been one of my ships that have come in. I'm still waiting for a big armada, but right now, that's a good ship.
It'll do.
Yeah.
Okay, so it sounds like then you were off and running. Did it hit you like, oh, I am now a novelist, and here we go?
I guess it did hit me, but in my head, I had always considered myself a novelist, even, throughout the selling of this, because I knew, okay, I had written this, even though it hadn't yet been published. I still thought, well, I'm a novelist because I have written a book. And then just knowing my tendency to be a slacker, as soon as I finish a book, the characters come into my head for the second book, like, okay, we know if you'll sit around too long, you'll never get to this. So here we are. So while Patty Jane was being shopped around, I had written my second book that came into my head via a guy named Dick Lindstrom and his daughter Darcy. And then they brought the title, and I had no idea what an oasis on Flame Lake was, but there it was in my head. And then when I started writing, I realized that it referred to this basement nightclub that Dick operates out of his home and has his neighbors and, the mailman and people perform. And it's really fun. When I was on tour for that book, I had probably, well, it wasn't a half a dozen, maybe about 5 people told me that they had similar clubs in their neighborhood. Like one guy said that he sang Frank Sinatra songs every Tuesday in his dining room for neighbors. And I just thought, wow, well, that is a really unifying neighborhood thing to have a little neighborhood nightclub.
Yeah, who knew?
I know.
Now, I'd love to hear about kind of your inspiration for writing, because I've heard you say several times that the characters just present themselves and the title just present themselves. Do they just show up and you write them? How does it work?
In most cases, that has been true. I won't see them. I can't see their physical characteristics, but I feel like I know them. And I'm given their names, and it's usually their full names. And as I said, the title, which is so helpful, on occasion, maybe there have been 2 or 3 books where the title that came into my head wasn't the title that I ultimately went with. But that's almost always the impetus for starting a book, is that, wow, these people want a story told. I have no idea what their story is, but I'm going to start writing. And then the more I write, the more I find out, and the more I go back and change things. And I have to say, for Angry Housewives Eating Bon Bons, that book's inspiration was my many visits to book clubs. And at that time, I had probably visited maybe 50 book clubs, and I had always been impressed by not only the discussions they would have, but just the fun and the sociability of these groups, and the, appetizers and wine are always a thumbs up. So I thought, I want to write a book about a book club, but to keep them in each other's lives, I just made them all live on the same cul-de-sac, which is funny because in Minneapolis, we really don't have very many cul-de-sacs, but I put them on a cul-de-sac. And then
I love that one. To me, can you tell us a little bit more about what that's about? And then let's dig into that one a little bit.
Yes, that book covers a span of 30 years in the lives of 5 women. They all live on a fictitious cul-de-sac called Frisia Court. They are Faith, who's a transplant from the South, Audrey, who's like the neighborhood at the beginning, sex pot, Kari, who's an older widowed woman, Merritt, who by all accounts, seems to be living a perfect life. She's married to a dashing doctor. She's physically lovely, and yet behind closed doors, this dashing doctor uses her as a punching bag. And then the last character is Slip, who's a really physically tiny woman, but that's the only small thing about her. She's a social activist. She's just a real character. And so then I wanted to, just write about their lives, the lives of the book club. So just to keep the reader aware of what time we were in, because occasionally I'll skip ahead a couple years. Each chapter I begin with the host of the book club, the book she chose, and why she chose it. So that just gives the reader, oh yeah, okay, we're in 1970 now. And some of those books that they read, I chose for their historical import. Like 1 month they're reading Everything You Wanted to Know About Sex, but were afraid to ask. And I do remember when that book came out, and, all my friends' mothers had it. My mother did not. maybe she knew everything. I don't know. So it was just a really fun book to write. And again, because it starts in the late 60s, I got to cover a lot of ground, what was happening in the United States during all those tumultuous years. And
yeah, because it spans decades, this book.
Yeah. Yep.
It spoke to me, and I've read it several times and sobbed out loud every single time, because it speaks so much to me of what it feels like we've lost in this modern age of parenting, which really is the cul-de-sac and the sisterhood and the neighborhood and the village raising the children. And I just missed it so much reading this book.
Oh, thank you. That makes me think of my own childhood, when my mother and the neighbors, they would have what were called coffee parties, and almost every day they'd have, they'd get together for coffee. And when my own daughters were young, I lived on a wonderful block with 2 other mothers whose kids were my kids' ages. So we just, there were some just languidly fantastic summer days when the 3 of us would just sit, as our kids played and swung, and, swung meaning on swings, not,
Sure.
any other meaning. I think in my mother's generation, they also, even though my mother wasn't a part of it, all my friends' mothers were part of the weekly beauty salon visit, which was almost a social event too. My mother never went, just because she was very proud of her naturally wavy hair. But they just found places to talk, about light things, about really deep things. And I do think we're coming back to that in a way via book clubs. I mean, when I wrote Patty Jane's House of Curl, I knew there were book clubs, but it was pre-Oprah having her own book club, which I think just made nationwide book clubs explode. So I know my own book club has been together for about 20 years, and it's a really nice monthly marker. Oh yeah, I get to go talk to these women about this book. We have dinner. Oh yeah, and I mention wine? And
I think that goes without saying. Many people just call it wine club.
Yeah, these morning book clubs, I think, no.
You're doing it wrong. Okay.
So that's how that book came about.
Well, I think everyone should read it. It is delicious. Actually, a friend of mine in college suggested that we have a commune in 2000 and all raise our children together. And we all just laughed at her and brushed her off and said, "You're crazy." And then we spread out all over the country. And then 10 years into raising our kids away from each other, we were like, we were fools and you were right. So we're in for the retirement commune. All right. Tell me about, you have a brand new book that just came out, Chronicles of a Radical Hag with Recipes.
Yes, I do. And that book came to me with the appearance of a woman named Hayes Evans. And I knew right away she was an octogenarian. She had just celebrated her 81st birthday, and she was a long-time columnist for a fictitious small, well, about 20,000 people, small town newspaper in central Minnesota. And this isn't a spoiler because it happens right at the beginning of the book, but after viewing an amateur production of Guys and Dolls, she suffers a massive stroke, which
As you do.
Can be. Yes. Luckily, a lady tonight. And so she's so beloved in the community that Susan McGrath, the newspaper publisher, decides to reprint her old columns until her hopeful recovery. And so then we get her columns that, speak to the bombings in Birmingham, that speaks to Mount St. Helens, 9/11, just all the big historical events that happened, as well as what was happening in her domestic life. And then the story also follows Susan and her sullen 14-year-old son, who's tasked to work at the paper during a summer. So it was really, really fun and interesting to write, because I did go back and look, what was happening in 1966? What was happening in 1978? And the recipes come about because one person in particular, a Mr. Joseph Snell, considers her columns nothing but the rantings of a lunatic radical hag. And, there are just some men who can't stand a woman to have an opinion. And so to mollify her critics.
And yet he responds all the time.
He does.
He can't just let it go.
No, he's one of those guys, So she prints the occasional recipe just because she wants to have them all, put down their boxing gloves and pick up a pair of oven mitts instead. So it's a womanly thing to do, in that we're often, we want everybody to feel good. And are you okay? Are you okay? And, I thought it was almost sexist of me to do that, under the assumption that Hayes would feel, I have to make everyone feel okay. And she really doesn't. It's sort of with a wink and a nod, like, okay, they're really good recipes, but it's not a strict mollification. It's just, let's just have some fun. Here's some recipes. I know you have your opinions, which really clash with mine, but let's meet in the middle ground of butter and sugar.
Let's have some cookies.
Yeah.
That's one of the things I love so much about your novels is they're so deeply feminist while celebrating and honoring femininity. Does that make sense? Like your characters aren't feminists because they're out there ball busting, taking over the world necessarily, which is what sometimes happens, but rather valuing the feminine.
But I appreciate your feeling that way. And I always have considered myself a feminist and don't think it's a dirty word. Think it's a fabulous word, and know many men, I'm honored to say, who are feminists as well. And I think I just honor people. And because I'm a woman, I will write about women, but I also, have some books where a man is the lead character. But I think our differences are much more inconsequential than our similarities, which sounds sort of, what? Well, no, men are like this or that. But really, if you boiled the stew of our desire down, it would all, we both, men and women, pretty much want the same things. I guess it's our approach in getting them that differs. But I love women. I love men. I celebrate people in all of our many, many foibles. And as a writer, I think that's what is so meaningful to me, because I get to constantly be in worlds different than mine, trying to figure out why people act as they do, and then I go down to Moe's bar at the end of the night and decompose. Decompose? What the hell?
Decompress, perhaps.
There you go. Thank you. Wow, was that Freudian or what?
Oh, that was funny. You also do a one-woman show every year in Minneapolis. Tell us about that.
I do. So in LA, I had been in improvisational groups. Mitzi Shore at the Comedy Store had put me in one of her groups. In Minneapolis, I've done a lot of improv with people, and it's always so much fun. And then it made me wonder, because I had a group of friends, and we did a really fun rendition of Bad Seed. And, the 1950s play / film about a diabolical 8-year-old girl who is a murderer. And I played the drunken mother of one of her victims, and I played my husband, who was a sock puppet. So it was just a really bizarre play, really fun. We had 3 revivals of it here in Minneapolis, and then they took it to LA. But I had a family, I couldn't go to LA, and almost all of the people who went out there stayed there. So a lot of my acting pals were now gone, and I thought, okay, I want to do a show. So I did start writing like 2 or 3 person shows for friends here. And then I thought, well, what would it be like to just do improv by myself? And so I decided to do that. And the show is called Party in the Rec Room. And the conceit is that the audience members are all at my party in my rec room. And I do make a blender full of margaritas because it's a party.
Sure.
And some guests get them. I always keep a nice frosty glass for myself, the party host. And then I ask, what's your favorite perfume? Where would you like to travel this year? What's a favorite book you've read? And then I go backstage and grab wigs, hats, props, and then do a monologue based on those suggestions. So,
oh my God, I didn't realize this show was improv. How terrifying.
Yeah. It's that terrifying that's also wondrous. Like, whee!
Here we go.
Yeah. And sometimes, I'm scrambling backstage, grabbing a pair of glasses or a, stovepipe hat, thinking, what am I going to do? And then I know as soon as I get on stage and open my mouth, I'll have to have figured it out. So the beauty of it is that it's a new show every night, and I don't have to memorize any lines.
You just show up, make margaritas.
Yep. There you go.
Exhilarating.
That's the ticket.
How long have you been doing that?
I have been doing it for a long time. I don't even know. I could be every January for maybe a dozen years. I don't know. The month of January, I get weekends at this fabulous theater in Minneapolis that has a vintage bowling alley, a bar, restaurant, and then a theater attached to it. Okay. It may be one of a kind.
It sounds like a January destination. And people show up. People in Minneapolis are made of sturdy stock, I must say.
Well, you understand that you can always go inside. I mean, sometimes it's a drag to, shovel out your driveway and get your windshield de-iced and, for your car to warm up. But you can always, we're not in the middle of the plains. There are always places, buildings you can go into.
Now tell me, what advice do you have for writers who are just starting out?
Oh, I would say believe in yourself. And that sounds so glib, but, society is really good at trying to snuff out those dreams that people have. And so believe in yourself. Okay, that's the dreamy bit of advice, but I mean it. But also be a good reader. And when you read something you really like, ask yourself, why did that move me? Why was I transported here? What did the writer do? I would say have a daily practice, even if it's 15 minutes sitting down, just honor your writing time. When my kids were little, I learned, okay, I can't disappear into a garret. I have got to find time to write, when these little small people are asking for superfluous stuff like dinner. So I would, carve out little times, and I would write, with kids literally playing at my feet. And so try to make it a daily habit. Know that it's far easier for publishers or agents to say no than it is yes. But again, perseverance is such an important part of writing, as it is anything. And if you decide this is really important to you, you decide when you're going to say, okay, I give up. Only you decide that. And just keep plugging away. Write as much as you can. If you're stymied, try to write in a different style, or use prompts like, okay, I'm going to write about a person named, and then, ask your mailman, what's your aunt's name? Clara. Okay, I'm going to write a couple paragraphs about Clara. Just know that everybody's going to try to shut doors. So your job is just to keep those doors open. So.
Okay, wonderful.
That's what I advise right now. I'm sure that I could come up with many other bits of advice. Oh, I do have to plug one guy's book. Stephen Pressfield writes a book called The War of Art, not the art of war, The War of Art, which is all about resistance and how and it's not just to writers. It's really written for everybody. But he wrote it initially for writers, just how to combat that resistance and that internal force that we all have that makes us stop doing what we love. And so I highly recommend that book and his website also, stephenpressfield.com.
Okay, wonderful. What do you make of kind of what has happened around women over the last few years?
Oh boy, I think it's about time. I can't understand why people think they, by putting somebody down or suppressing somebody, somehow that makes them rise.
Right.
In Chronicles of Radical Hag, with recipes, Hayes Evans writes a column about our beloved Minnesota Senator Paul Wellstone, who was just an amazing person as well as a politician whose belief was we all do better when we all do better. And so I just love that women are, shaking off those shackles that, society has so often tried to clamp on us, and not being afraid and saying, this is what happened, the Me Too movement. And it's just, if I were a man and had power, I'd think, oh, I like this. This is fun. But I also think I'd be the kind of man to realize, but it might be fun to share this a little bit. And, I just don't like how the scales are so tipped. And that's why it's exciting, because it seems like they are finding a place of equilibrium in a way that hasn't happened before.
Yeah, let's hope.
Yeah. Hope and fight. Hope, fight, and change.
That's right. All the things. What have I not asked you about that I should have asked you about?
I think we've had a very nice conversation. I'll just say the one thing that worries me, well, among many, is I don't know. I'm afraid for readers, including myself, because of the distraction factor. And the internet, and how quickly you can get information, and then how quickly you can get sucked into information that you really weren't that interested in, but the graphic was, wow, kind of flashy. And I don't like how the internet has cut into my reading time. So that's something I'm certainly trying to corral. 'Cause really the pleasures of getting into somebody's world via a book, or, a good movie, is just, it's unbeatable. And I think it just not only soothes our psyche, but it makes things blossom in us that I don't see, constant checking online does. And that's my rant for the day, and I'm sticking to it. I've got more.
Well, I share that concern with you, and for my kids and for myself, I'll look at my phone to see what time it is, and then an hour has gone by, and all I've done is look at Facebook. And then I'm too tired to pick up the book. I went to bed early to read. So yeah, we got to nip that. Where can people find you?
Oh boy, that's another good question. I do have a Lorna Landvik author Facebook page that I will write posts. I still struggle with social media. I do have a website, lornalandvik.com. But again, I'm not somebody who's updating things every day, month, year. No, I try
Ever?
a little more current than that, but I don't, I'm not on Twitter or anything. I just, it used to be that you would just know a writer through her books. Mm-hmm. And now, you have to have such a social media presence. So I do have one, but it's a little more shadowy not shadowy in a criminal sense, but,
Thanks for clarifying.
Yeah, I'm trying to get better. Let's just say that. So,
okay. Well, let's tell people to go read your books. How about that?
Yeah. That's a good one.
They'll get to know you the old-fashioned way. There
you go. Yeah. And if you like to write, really glowing reviews, please do.
Wonderful. Do that.
On your social media. Yes. Yeah.
Lorna, this was such a treat for me. Thank you so much for doing this.
Julie, thank you so much. I really appreciate it. Now I'm going to go back out in that field and cavort.
Okay. Don't tumble down the hill. You've been listening to The Other 50%, a herstory of Hollywood. I'm Julie Harris Walker. I'd like to thank Lorna Landvik for sharing her story. And special thanks to Jay Rowe, Danny Rosner, and Allison McQuaid for the music. Please find us on your favorite podcast provider and leave a review. And of course on our website, theother50%.com, all spelled out, for added features, bios of our guests, and the merch. And you can also follow us on all the social media platforms. And go subscribe to catchabreakpodcast.com. Thanks for listening. See you next time.